Hey there, my name's Dan and I'm the co-founder and CEO at Chargify. And it is a privilege this morning to be joined by Paul Russell, Business Development Leader for IBM Smart Buildings. Paul, good evening to you in the UK. How's things going over there?
Yeah, hi, good evening, Dan, and good morning for you. Yeah, things are going well, actually. A lot going on, some good stuff to talk about. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, exciting time. So we're both in geographies that are starting to ease some of their restrictions. It is June the 9th today. So we're several months into this now. What's the sense on the ground there?
Similar, I think we're beginning to unlock things slowly. We're trying to experiment about what works, what doesn't work. I think there's a little bit more optimism about what's going on with the economy, how we're going to get back moving, and also an eye on what's going to change for the better, the way society works. So that's quite interesting, and really the role of technology and what can we do that's secure and safe versus what's a little bit out of the possible, but actually probably a little bit a bit too far out there. So that's quite intriguing for us, of course, at IBM, but more importantly for society generally, what works and what doesn't. And across the world, we're seeing some examples of that.
So we're now better part of 3 months into the lockdown here in the West. There's been so many webinars, so many videos. What are the pieces of technology or the value propositions that you've seen across this last quarter or so that you think are really resonating and stuff that's going to be used by IBM and your customers?
I think the biggest thing is probably how we're repurposing technology that's already there. I mean, we've seen some fantastic examples of how people are using, just the social media applications to, help people stay safe and protect society. So that's quite amazing. And I think the power of two platforms, the power of the smartphone, which we already knew before, I think has now moved to a new level. Right. And then also the power of social networking that probably was always a social networking tool is now a corporate tool in a much stronger way, which is going to give some challenges to corporates who have already got tools to do those things, who are now faced with people living their lives on WhatsApp or Twitter or Instagram. And then that return to work is going to be an interesting, I suppose, coming together of the corporate tools versus the social tools. And the social tools might be the more successful ones to make people feel happier, safer, and probably more productive. So that's going to be quite fascinating. So a lot of it is technology already in place versus brand new technology that's just been thought of. And there's been some interesting things where people have tried things and failed. I think the whole contact of people and keeping people safe when they're actually in close proximity is going to be interesting, because already there's some technologies that might be really good, but might not have got the traction. And I think a lot of that will come down to behavioral design, which is fascinating for us because one of the things that we do a lot is design thinking about putting ourselves in the shoes of the person that matters the most. And, as technologists, we often miss that point. We rely on bias to think that we know best. And I think what's taught us with the pandemic is to take a step back and really focus on who is the person that matters the most. And when you do that, you find some fascinating things, which I think generally across the world, we've realized now.
So start of June, what are your customers saying in Europe about when they're going to be going back to the office?
I think it's pretty much started. There's examples where people are saying, I'll just try, I'll go in for a meeting and I'll experiment. It's quite interesting to see that kind of nervousness about, why don't we meet up again? Which is bizarre because 3 months ago, it could equally have been, why don't we do a video call? Now it's actually, shall we try physically to meet up? And I think a lot of people are looking at return to work and how they can phase that and how they can make their workplace safer, but also with an eye on what does normal look like and whether normal will be full occupancy or whether normal will be more of a hybrid. And I talk a lot to customers about this autonomy of the workplace and how we can kind of be fluid across our workplaces, with an eye that one of those workplaces is our home, is the bedroom in my house that I'm talking to you from, that I never thought I would spend probably 40 hours a week in, right, for 10 weeks. and you know, quite commonly for so many other people. And I think that's going to create some new models, certainly in countries like the UK, where people might not travel like they used to, and that will change their day in the life of. And that is going to be fascinating. And you see that example already with people saying, look, you know, we'll have certain rules of engagement and you don't need to come to the office anymore. And, you know, that's got interesting ramifications for a lot of different industries, I think.
So what does the autonomous workplace mean for you guys at IBM?
I think we're already in it, because I think we would say that, you know, we've had that for many years, that we've got the technology to allow it to happen. I think what's new for us is, I would say about the switch in the majority of people at IBM are working remotely now. So actually it's turned itself on its head. And I think that's going to give some challenges to the technology, because suddenly you're no longer the odd one out on the speakerphone in the office, in the conference room where the majority of the people are there. We've all been there where you're the guy on the speakerphone and they've all gone out for coffee and they've forgotten about you.
Right.
Or you don't feel like you're the same because you can't present on the screen or something, to suddenly the odd one out might be the person who physically is in the office in London.
Right.
Because they can't enjoy the Zoom experience, or, you know, whatever tool you're using. So for IBM, I think that the interesting that will be for us is, how do we make sure that everybody's okay, but also how do we make sure people can still physically meet people? And I think one of the changes that we might see is more community workplaces appearing. So for example, you know, one of the things that I think about, I work for IBM, we're 300,000 people. I can find out quite a bit about all of those people through some of our tools. But what I can't find out is there anyone near me right now, within, say, a mile radius? Because actually I could cycle to a community workplace. But of course, where I live, there's no community workplaces. There's coffee bars and there's hotels, but there's no community workplace where I could go and meet people who work for IBM who might be near me. And I think that's going to really change, certainly again for UK and maybe Europe, where the traditional suburbs that might be struggling in terms of what's happened might regenerate and create these community workplaces that mean that people like me don't travel into London anymore. And so that change of autonomous workplace is going to really stress some of the traditional transport links, but also create opportunities in suburb areas where restaurants have closed, but actually that restaurant could reinvent itself to be a community workplace.
Okay, so autonomous working, I guess, can mean therefore two things, right? The ability for somebody to work on their own, wherever they are, and on their own, dial in, join up virtually with others. Does it also mean for IBM autonomous technologies working together to provide better experiences as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're already doing that now. I mean, you and I were talking before we came on about all the different tools I've used today, even for video calls. So for me, my experience needs to be able to allow me to use them all in a really, you know, kind of touchless way without any, you know, thinking, oh, how do I use this tool? And how do I use that tool? It just needs to work for me. And I think there are some areas where that isn't the case, but the majority of the time is, if I need to do a video call, it doesn't really matter what tool I use.
Yeah.
Just I can do that.
So go on, what have you used today then, Paul? So we're on Zoom right now. What other applications have you got taking up CPU cycles on your machine?
So I've done some Cisco WebEx, which is, you know, the kind of default tool for IBM. I've done some Microsoft Teams, which is you know, a great tool as well. And I've also used BlueJeans, which maybe, you know, some people might know about, but BlueJeans is a great tool as well. So I think that's four plus, you know, WhatsApp channels and no phone calls. That's the other thing, is there's no phone calls. And I look at my smartphone, I can't remember last time I made a normal phone call, because it's all done because I'm sitting in front of my screen. And I think that autonomy of the smartphone and how flexible I can use what's on there is really also creating new opportunities to make us think about what we do. People are starting to use it more for video calls because they realize they can do that now. So I think, yeah, that's the autonomy of the tools, the autonomy of the location is going to be where we're headed.
How do you think, one thing that we've been thinking about, and I know larger organizations have as well, is that younger employees, perhaps they don't have, suburban houses, perhaps, they're sharing a flat or an apartment with a friend, or maybe they don't even know really who they're sharing an apartment with. Maybe they're flat buddies. Perhaps they're working on their bed because their bedroom doesn't have space for a desk. One of the things I know Mark Zuckerberg was speaking about last week in his dynamic work town hall with the Facebook team was around making sure that younger members of the staff have the same upwards trajectory and same opportunities to grow inside of an organization. Do you think that companies are doing enough to think about younger members of the team, both in terms of their own working environment, perhaps if they're going or being asked to go more dynamic and more autonomous, and perhaps there is a working from home element there? And then also, how do you think we might enable the kind of upward trajectory, growing relationships with senior management that might have traditionally become ways to grow through an organization?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think there's a gap there. I agree that there may be a feeling for a younger workforce for those reasons you mentioned will want to get back to the physical workplace. And, they're desperate to do that. And I know some examples of people who are desperate to get back, not just to the physical office, but also the social experience that comes with that in a city like London. They want to go to that pub after work because that's what they grew up to do. And, want to stand out on the streets and have a few beers and get together. And I totally understand that. And, I think that's going to create a new dynamic. I was on a call with a gentleman from CBRE, one of their kind of senior real estate leaders, and he talked about this 5G plus, and he wasn't referring to the 5G network, but he was talking about the 5 generations plus in organizations. And how do we now deal with that? And they've done some research around that. And I think companies like IBM will have probably 5 generations of employee, because we have people who've worked for IBM for 40 years. So, how do we, understand the dynamic first? Because I'm not sure companies do that now. Has what's happened thrown up some new learning experiences where we can, speak to a younger generation and really use what they know? Because, you could argue they probably a little bit more socially savvy. How do we use that in a proactive way, as opposed to treating it like a shadow where we knew it went on, but it didn't really bother us because we're corporate and we want to use corporate tools? Can we now use some lessons from how they use social platforms to inform us to change the way we work? And I think that's going to be quite exciting, because if I'm a leader in an organization, I probably need to take a moment to listen to them, that maybe before I didn't. They had to fit in the way we worked. And, that was the norm. I think now it's just thrown this up in the air and it's given us a chance to listen and learn. Makes
tons of sense. The shape of cities, I know that you previously were in the construction industry. What does this mean for cities? I mean, we've heard there's so many opposing opinions, right? I've heard Eric Schmidt, ex-chairman at Google, talking about there being an increase in business real estate, or commercial real estate rather, because of perhaps more social distancing. But also I've heard others say there aren't going to be hub and spoke kind of large corporate campus, and then multiple others. There's going to be many more perhaps neighborhood offices for a particular company. One of our customers here in San Francisco, they're actually looking at occupying some retail space. They're a B2B brand, but they want customers, they want their employees to also experience the brand in almost like an Apple town hall type manner with their retail stores, or town square rather. So how do you guys at IBM, and you personally, how do you think about that corporate campus versus satellites?
That's a good point. I can understand it. I think we'll probably learn from other industries and what they do. So for example, I mentioned, what will the transport industry do in terms of getting people into London? What will the hospitality industry do, whether it's theatres or restaurants? Because a lot of what they're trying to do will probably be seen as a pull or a magnet to how maybe some of the offices will go. And whether it's the offices will lead the hospitality or the hospitality will lead the offices, I don't know. And I guess the government might have a view on that right now. At the moment, there's a big debate in the UK about should it be 2 meters or 1 meter? And I think the trigger is if it goes to 1 meter, that will probably start to unlock the hospitality industry. There's lots of reasons why we would do that, and other European countries have already done this. So I guess if I'm a real estate person looking at my property portfolio where I've got a hub and spoke, maybe these industries will give me some lever to where I should go, because that's where my workforce will want to go. If they can have a nice bar and restaurant, but it's in a neighborhood, but I can be productive, then that is going to be useful for me. And one of the examples that, as you talked, that I thought about is one of our clients in London, in Canary Wharf, the financial sector. Prior to COVID, talked to me about his view of his space was all about zero. He called it zero space, and what he meant was he maximized all of his real estate, all of his footprint. When I spoke to him recently, he talked about, well, my product is the same no matter where my people work. And what he was trying to say is maybe the kind of traditional Citadel HQ will be different now, because my product hasn't changed. I still sell those financial services regardless of where my people work. We've proved that. So maybe that will change my footprint, and I will move to more neighborhood. In fact, even to the point where he talked about, why can't I share the same neighborhood with another bank? The physical building, why can't we just work together? Obviously with some sort of, separation, but why can't we just collaborate? Because the customers will want to come to us. And if they come to us, what will that mean to restaurants and pubs and theaters that could cluster around us and create that sort of village type world? And I think there's some truth in that. I think it's going to be interesting to see who triggers this, because there's a lot of financial implications to real estate right now. And a lot of people want to get back to those buildings to get their rent. So I guess there's some pressures, and I suppose short-term versus long-term is hard to quantify. But I think in the next few months, there'll be some experimentation.
Yeah.
Fail fast, let's see what happens, what worked, and try something different.
Yeah. Well, humanity's on a constant pendulum of centralization to devolution anyway. So it's going to be really interesting to see what, see what happens.
Yeah, we have we embrace design thinking, hugely at IBM, and as do many other companies, of course, but it feels like we're in one great big design thinking workshop.
Yeah.
Whether it's governments or technology or politicians or, health, are all experimenting because there's no blueprint to go. And it's fascinating to be in that, because that will throw up opportunities that we didn't know existed last week. And I think that's really going to challenge some of the research that we all look at, where we look at, what's going to happen. And I've been doing this already, looking at predictions pre-COVID of what technology in the next 10 years was going to be mainstream. And when you look at some of this and you think, that's never going to happen now, because that's, we're not going to allow that, whether it's privacy or, the way we use technology to collect data. Some things are really important. Other things have gone, because we will not tolerate that anymore, because we've learned that we won't, accept that intrusion on our privacy. And I think that's challenging the research industry as well.
Mm. One of the things that Chargify, obviously being predominantly in wireless charging, we've noticed is a trend for customers wanting touchless workplaces. So logging into a Zoom, WebEx, pick your flavor, call simply by putting your phone down on a charging spot. Many of our customers are looking to go 100% free desking. So when you come back, there is no assigned seating, and you choose a desk as long as it's in the green zone for that day and that desk or space isn't furloughed. Are you seeing touchless becoming a trend in the workplace going forwards?
To be honest, not massively yet. And I think that's only because the redesign of the workplace was something we talked a lot about, but it was always in maybe, let's call it in pockets or in small chunks. Now I think the redesign of the workplace is much more comprehensive. And I think there's more emphasis on how the human being moves through their workspace. And I think as we now start to understand and learn and observe how the human wants to use their workplace, it's opening up new lessons to learn about what they want to touch and what they don't. Because I think prior to this, we were quite happy for them to touch their workplace. That was the thing, we were okay about that. But now I think we've realized that there are certain places that we do not want them to touch, or because for a safety reason, So how can we augment their experience by providing a touchless technology? And, the Chargify product is a great example of that. And, I've spoken to lift manufacturers about what they can do to prevent us touching buttons on lifts. I used to work for a company that made printers, that it was a very touch interface, to actually move away from that. I still need to print, but maybe I don't need to touch anything. So I think there's this shift to the human being having a touchless experience is almost like a uniform step forward. And that's going to be interesting to see how we then use that to redesign the workplace. And it's not just the workplace, it's when I get on the train, what am I okay to touch versus what am I not? And the trains are designed for you to touch them, of course. So how are we going to deal with that is it's going to be interesting as well.
And do you think employers are going to be interested in that data? I mean, I was speaking with somebody earlier around, if it wasn't already, it's certainly going to be an OKR for facilities managers and HR teams that their facilities are pandemic proof and their ways of working are pandemic proof. What does that mean for contact tracing and privacy, and where do you draw the line? It's been a hot topic. What's your personal view?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I would say that if I could rephrase the response in terms of, we know from history that once we understand a human's behavior and we build the technology that really addresses that, things can happen. Things that we never thought would happen, it has. I'm just thinking, the ATM machine, how that sort of changed the way we get money, whereas before we'd never have thought of that. And the way I think about this is that there's a Stanford professor, I think you may know this story, BJ Fogg, and he talks about this behavioral model. And I think about this all the time when I talk to customers. And basically, he talks about, to change someone's behavior, there needs to be sufficient motivation. They need to have efficient ability, and they need a prompt. So when I think about, using mobile to do contact tracing, and I want to change people's behavior because I want them to feel like they're safe in my workspace. What is their motivation? Well, it could be quite simple. They're motivated to do this because they want to stay healthy, and they want their co-workers to stay healthy and their families. So that's okay. Then the ability, well, yeah, they have a smartphone, and the smartphone has all of the technical components to allow this to work. And they need a prompt. And sometimes the prompt is the hardest thing to solve. And when you don't solve the prompts, the others fail. So I think, around this whole point about contact tracing and whether I should give you my data and what you do with it, needs to almost go through this kind of test. And I think we've seen already some examples where technology has failed on that test. Because we haven't dealt with the prompt sufficiently. And so if people immediately think, I'm not quite sure about sharing that data with you. And I think when you solve the prompts, I'm thinking of maybe sort of, the Amazon, and, I want to, get deliveries at home. So, yeah, my prompt is, I want that. So I'll give you some data. So I think when that happens, things start to change. And in the case of this subject, we've got to spend more time on that. So technology companies like mine and yours need to really focus on, to change their behavior, to buy my product, have I lined up those three things? And they need to occur simultaneously. That is the other sort of rule of this thing, which I think is true. Can I simultaneously tick the box on their motivation, their ability, and their prompt? And I think when I do, data privacy starts to change. When I don't, people hold back on their data privacy and you can't get it, and therefore you don't move on.
Yeah, people need to understand the value exchange, and it's not just benefiting the big guy upstairs, right?
Absolutely.
It's benefiting me in some way.
Well, that empathetic approach is what is in it for them. I know what is in it for me because I'm trying to sell something, or I've got a particular reason for myself. But if I don't spend time being in their shoes, I'll never understand what's in it for them. And the confirmation bias, where we rely on information we knew before to prove our point, is a real challenge for technology companies, because we tend to look at information that justifies what we're doing. And so confirmation bias, if we can take a pause and move away from that and actually listen and learn and observe, we can probably find a way through some data privacy discussions, and at the same time keep the human being happy that they're getting what they want, which is why we're all here.
So last question, Paul. Let's fast forward 12 months, June 2021. What does this all look like?
Yeah. Okay. I think it's going to be very similar to what it is right now. I think there's going to be
very similar pre or during COVID, or
sorry, yeah, probably more pre. I think in terms of the way we move. I think the human being naturally wants to kind of herd with other humans. So I think transportation will go back to the way it was, with probably some challenges, some differences. Sorry. I think what it will do though is it change the way of work, because we've proven that the technology that you and I are using, solves those three things I mentioned. The motivation, ability, and prompt. And so people go, actually, I've got choice now. I've got autonomy about where I want to work. So I probably won't travel, or I won't do things the way I did before. And for some organizations, they'll totally embrace that and move completely away from their offices. Others will go all the way back to where they used to be. And others may go in the middle, where they create like a hybrid. And I think probably in 12 months' time, we'll have hybrid working, where people will be able to rub along with each other virtually and physically, will be better savvy at using technology because they've learned to, whereas before they didn't. And going back to your point, which I think is a really key one, I genuinely hope we will take some time to listen to the different generations in our organization, not just the younger generation, but equally the older generation, who have got a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience to reframe problems. And I hope, IBM is a great example of that, how we take time to listen and observe and feed that back into the way we redesign the workplace. And when that happens, I think we'll be in a good place. And I hope governments will follow that as well.
Amazing. Thanks, Paul. How can people find you and join that journey with you over the next 12 months?
I mean, I'm not a great social person other than LinkedIn. I'm a big person on LinkedIn, and I like writing about stuff. And I'm a big advocate of design thinking. So anybody who wants to connect to me on LinkedIn, please do. And I used to be a technologist, and I have learned through painful experiences in different industries that to reframe the problem is the first thing you should do. It's not always the original problem you think you're solving. And when you do that, exciting things can happen. So anybody of that ilk is manna for heaven for me. Paul. And IBM, because that's what IBM's all about, of course.
Of course. Paul, thank you for spending some time with us today. Stay safe out there, and all the best.
Yeah, and you. Take care.
Thanks, mate. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.